In our last video, I showed you how to mark your fabric for quilting with stencils, and now it's time to start quilting the first design. Hello, I'm Dorie Hruska with Forever Quilting. Welcome back to the second video in our Free-Motion Quilting Challenge, Quilting on the Lines. In this free video series, you are going to learn the continuous quilting path of 9 different grid designs, and I'll be demonstrating how to quilt them on a domestic machine and a long arm. I'll be quilting these designs on a simply pieced quilt top, but you could also quilt them on a solid piece of fabric. If you'd like to quilt along with me on this piece top, you can get a copy of the free pattern by going to the link below. Before we get started on the quilting, let's take a look at the travel path for the first design. Straight single line cross hatching on a horizontal square grid. This is nothing more than a bunch of horizontal and vertical lines, but what most quilters struggle with is how to keep the lines straight and how to make the stitching lines continuous. We'll talk more in a minute about how to keep the lines straight, but first let's take a look at how to make the quilting lines continuous. Here I'm going to work in a grid of 3 squares by 3 squares, but this method would work for any size grid. The path to quilting this design continuously only requires a little backtracking hidden in the ditch. Before quilting the inside of any block, I like to stitch in the ditch around the outer edge of the block first to stabilize the block. Then draw the vertical lines, backtracking through the ditch, then the horizontal lines. It really doesn't matter which you do first, so I'll draw it both ways. Now when it comes to working with a larger grid, like a 3-inch grid, you might want to go ahead and stitch more of these lines. So again, we would go ahead and go across our ditch to stabilize. Then instead of going all the way over to this side of the square, let's break this square up into a 4-patch. So we'd actually come over here and then down. This just makes more quilting.
Throughout this video series, we'll be working with different shape rulers to help us control the machine or fabric and create the designs. I want you to feel confident in knowing how to use these tools safely. Quilting with rulers on a sit-down machine is very similar to quilting on a long arm. They both require you to have a hard surface under your fabric to rest the rulers on. For a long arm, this would be an extended ruler base. This accessory is usually purchased separately from the long arm and is specific for your brand of machine. The one shown here is for the APQS machine, and you can see how easy it is to slide over the throat of the machine. Check with the manufacturer of your long arm for a ruler base made for your machine. Most sit-down long arm machines come with a large table, but on the domestic machine you may want to invest in a larger extended base, so you have a large surface to hold the ruler. I'm working on a baby lock chorus that has a table that measures 16 by 25. Another accessory that you will need is a ruler foot. This foot is a larger profile which matches the thickness of the rulers. This allows you to safely use rulers without letting the ruler slide under the foot as you quilt. Because this ruler foot measures a 1/2 inch across, it is important that the needle is centered inside the hopping foot. When the needle is centered, your ruler will consistently be 1/4 inch from the needle. Check with your machine manufacturer for the appropriate ruler foot for your machine. You will find lots of different rulers available on the market. Some short, some long, skinny, fat, handle, no handle. There are lots of options out there, and all the experts have their favorites. But it's really up to you to discover what works best for you. My preference is a fat ruler that's wide enough in my hand for me to hold it comfortably. The straight rulers I use when quilting on a long arm are by the Quilted Pineapple. For the domestic machine, I sometimes like to use a ruler that's skinnier. To make it easier to move the fabric around, I also like to add sticky tabs on the bottom of the ruler. This helps with gripping the fabric so it's easier to move. For free motion quilting, I like to use these quilting paddles by Martelli Notions. They fit in the palm of my hands, and the grippy foam on the bottom helps to move the fabric under the needle, without putting excessive strain on my hands and shoulders. Sometimes I use the paddle in one hand while holding the ruler in the other. It works pretty slick. Set the machine to regulated mode or adjust the speed of the machine so that it's slower than if you were free motion quilting. Be sure to drop the feed dogs so your fabric can move freely under the foot. For this project, choose a thread that is contrasting enough so you can easily see what you are doing. I'm using a 40 weight thread by Dash called Glide Thread. It has a nice shine to it to really show off the stitching. Before I quilt any block design, I will first stitch in the ditch around the edge. As you can see here, I've already stitched in the ditch around each block and quilted the sashing and borders, leaving the pins inside each block until it is time to quilt them. The ditch is also a great place to travel in order to make the design continuous, but I want to limit the amount of overstitching, so it's a good idea to make a plan first. On a domestic machine, I prefer to stitch the straight lines vertically, but if the quilt is too large or not easily turned, then I'll quilt them horizontally. But some ruler feet do not allow enough room for you to put the ruler behind the foot, so instead it's necessary to put it in front of the foot, although this does make it more difficult to see the marked lines.
When quilting on a longarm machine, you will follow the same travel path. First stitching in the ditch around the block to stabilize it, then quilt the vertical rows, traveling in the ditch to get to the next row. When quilting vertically, spread out your hand over the ruler. Your thumb and your first finger will do most of the work to hold the ruler in place against the hopping foot. By placing your middle finger or ring finger to the outer side of the ruler, this will help prevent the ruler from slipping as you move the machine. Only quilt between your thumb and your middle finger. The further you get from your fingertips, the more chance you have for the ruler to pop up and slip on top of the foot. This could cause damage to the ruler and potentially damage to your machine. For safety, turn off the machine every time you need to adjust your hand position. Once you become comfortable with ruler work, you will be able to move the ruler around without turning off the machine, like you see me doing here. Finish the crosshatch by quilting the horizontal rows. Remember, it doesn't matter if you stitch the vertical rows or the horizontal rows first. Just complete one before stitching the other. With a little practice, you'll be quilting with rulers like the pros. How fun was that? You have learned how to safely quilt with rulers on both a domestic machine and a longarm machine, and how to continuously quilt a square horizontal grid. These techniques alone are going to help you even if you're quilting on a piece top. And now that you know how to quilt on the lines, you're ready to learn how to fill in those spaces with more designs. You can find out how to do that by picking up a copy of my book, Making Connections. The Making Connection book not only teaches you how to continuously fill in the spaces on a grid, but also how to plan out a continuous quilting path for any type of piece block. I also teach these techniques at quilt shows, small groups, and soon there's going to be an online course. I hope you've enjoyed working on this design, and I look forward to seeing you next time when we work on a grid that is on point. Bye for now.